So in business, we often use this thing called focus groups, where you get a whole bunch of people in a room, and you ask them questions, and they don't know why they're there, why they're being asked questions. And in fact, chemical companies, I found out that chemical farmers are the most researched group of people. You actually have to pay them a lot more money than you pay normal people, and you even have to feed them to get them to come out, because they're so heavily researched by chemical companies. So they didn't know who I was or why I was there. And one of the questions we would ask after about a half an hour of them complaining about, and us asking them questions about why they use chemicals and what their biggest challenges were. When you said, well, what do you think about organic? They'd say, well, it's like going back, 40 acres and a mule. That's so old-fashioned. The old ways. We're not going to do that. And I realized that really, organic farming has changed drastically in the last 30, 60 years since the concept was first came to America. And the chemical companies would love nothing more than for people to think that organic is old-fashioned. But in fact, it's some of the most sophisticated, advanced, mental, intellectual technology, and even natural technology that's out there. So I think you're going to hear me say modern organic farming a lot, and that's why. So now this group, normally when I give this talk, people don't know, aren't familiar with some of the medical research about pesticides and chemicals in the environment and health. But often when I speak, people they have no idea, they have no clue that there's all this research out there. But one of the advantages that I have with being the CEO of Rodale, or any employee of Rodale has this advantage, is we have one of the largest health libraries in the country, maybe even the world, with about 5 research librarians who every day are combing through all the medical journals, all the scientific journals, and they're abstracting that information for our magazine and book editors. So I had access to a lot of information when I wrote Organic Manifesto that a lot of other journalists don't have. And then, as Lorna mentioned, I'm also the co-chair of the Rodale Institute, which has the longest running study of organic versus chemical agriculture in the country. It's been going on for 30 years. So it's as old as Beyond Pesticides. But I've also lived the life. I grew up on the first modern organic farm in America. There were technically organic farms before this, but my grandfather was the person who really brought the organic movement to the United States, and he bought a farm, and that's where I grew up. So I grew up not knowing that it was weird, except that sometimes people would come and look in our kitchen window while we were eating dinner. That was weird, but it was really actually an idyllic life for a kid, because summertime I'd leave the house in the morning without shoes, and the story is I wouldn't come home for dinner until my mother beeped the car horn. That's how we knew how to it was time to come home, and there were pigs and sheep and cows, and it was really. So I spent the first 6 or 7 years of my life thinking this was like paradise, and it was awesome, but then you go to school and the kids start making fun of you, and they don't want to come over to your house because they're afraid they're just going to get tofu and carrot sticks. But as Lorna knows, my mother, she never let a piece of tofu pass her lips in her whole life, and she was a good Pennsylvania Dutch woman, so we had steak and chicken and dumplings and good hearty German food. So this is my grandfather, J.I. He was a businessman himself. He and his brother had an electrical engineering business, but his passion was actually he was sickly himself. When he was in his 30s, his doctor said, "I can't do anything for you. You're just going to die young like all the rest of your siblings," which he had 10 of them. And so he went on this personal journey to heal himself. And that's how he started reading about Sir Albert Howard and Lady Eve Balfour, who wrote the book The Living Soil, which is, one of the classics. And he started visiting them and writing with, corresponding with them, and that's how he brought the idea back here, and he launched Organic Gardening Magazine in 1942. So, so you'd think, I'd know what I was talking about because I grew up on the farm and, worked in the business. But actually, 5 years ago, I was thinking to myself, I really don't know what I'm talking about. It takes a lot of work to really figure this whole world out, and what really is a GMO, and why is organic better? So I decided to write a book called, I knew it was going to be called Organic Manifesto. I was going to find out, I was going to figure this out. And I was getting angry because even though I wasn't sure exactly how everything fit together, what I saw was a fragmentation of our constituents. There was the local food movement, and it was either local or organic. It wasn't local and organic. There was the slow food movement. There was, organic is too expensive and it's only for rich people. And no, organic is, can't feed the world. And there was all this then there's the environmentalists who wouldn't support organic, and the organic people who wouldn't support anybody who ate meat. So there was all this fraction, and I felt like I wanted to understand what really was important, and that's what led me to research and write the book. And here's the 5 most important things I found out. Okay, organic is better than local. Local food is really important, and it's great, and it's awesome, and I fully support it. But think about it this way. Everything is local to somebody somewhere. And last time I checked, you can't grow coffee in Pennsylvania. You can't grow olive oil in Pennsylvania. You can't grow tea in Pennsylvania. And I think it's really important, there's regionalism is important, but it's also important to know that wherever you are buying food from, that the people who are growing it are not being contaminated and are not being poisoned by our choices. So, but the other thing that made me realize that organic is better than local was a business analysis that PepsiCo did on its Tropicana orange juice. So they hired in a big consulting firm to come in and do a carbon footprint of the whole process of, growing oranges, shipping, turning it into juice and shipping it, and packaging and everything, fully expecting to find that the food miles would be the biggest carbon footprint of the process. And they were shocked to find out that actually the biggest carbon footprint came from the production and application of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. So again, organic is better than local. And we should all support our local farmers, but we should also really encourage them to be organic, because otherwise they're contaminating your own local environment. The second reason why it's so important is that organic is healthier than chemical food. Again, when I started writing the book, I thought, this is all going to be about nutrition. And that's what all the media was talking about. Well, organic food is more nutritious than chemical food or conventional food. And then there were all these mixed studies. And as I started really collecting the research, I quickly realized nutrition is the least of our worries. It's like not even something we should even be thinking. I mean, yes, we should think about it. We should all have nutrition. But far more serious and far more deadly are the diseases and health consequences of the chemicals, not just that come into our mouths through eating the food, but that come into our bodies from the environment where it's sprayed or put, so this is beyond pesticides, but it's, we've heard a lot today about pesticides, but it's also it's herbicides, it's fungicides, it's fertilizers, and all these chemicals have been found to have really debilitating effects on our endocrine system, as Dr. Coburn has, my hero. Thank you, thank you for all your research, the hormone disruption that's happening. So there is evidence. In my book, I have 187 footnotes, and it's all been vetted by a lawyer. So Monsanto can't sue me. But there are studies that connect all these chemicals to everything from, as we know, diabetes, obesity, cancers, infertility, miscarriages, autism, ADHD, asthma, Parkinson's disease. Almost any disease that you can think of these days has evidence of being tied back to the chemicals that are in our environment. And what disturbs me as somebody who's in the media business myself with magazines and books is that that conversation isn't happening in the media today. It's all about, no offense to the Environmental Working Group, they're a great group, but the dirty dozen. Which ones should you eat and which ones shouldn't you eat? Well, it's everything. It's everywhere. It's systemic. It's in our, it's in our embryonic fluid. It's in the umbilical cords. It's in the babies when they're born. And there's research that shows that the damage that's done doesn't just go away if you stop using the chemicals. It's gets passed on to multiple generations. So, again, Theo said it the best this morning in that, we don't have much time left. We're basically sterilizing and destroying our species through these chemicals. So, the most important thing you can do is get rid of those chemicals in your life and buy organic food and grow organic food and, not spray pesticides inside or outside the home. And it's, for our kids too. They're the most susceptible. I'm also with Theo in that I believe that climate change and global warming is kind of the least of our worries at this point. But and part of that comes from a book I read when I was researching the book called The World Without Us. Has anybody read that book? It's a great book. But really what you realize when you read the book is that the planet's just going to be fine. In fact, it'll be better off without us. So we're the ones who have to worry and, about our survival. And one of the things that the research out of the Rodale Institute has found is that what chemicals do to the soil. So, we now know they're bad for our health, but what do they do to the soil? Well, they kill the soil too. They kill the living organisms in the soil. They kill the structure of the soil. So that soil can't absorb water. It can't hold on to water. It also can't absorb carbon dioxide. So, again, who are the bad guys in the climate change debate? Well, it's us driving our cars and the energy companies spewing out toxic CO2. Well, yeah, or cows having gas from eating corn, which they shouldn't be eating. Those are all serious things. But what we've also done at the same time is we've decimated the Earth's ability to cleanse itself. So that carbon cycle has been, destroyed. And what you're seeing as a result, because the soil can't hold that water, can't absorb it, is, as well as the carbon, is, increased flooding. All over the world we're seeing it. And so I don't think warming is really the problem. More, from an atmospheric standpoint, it seems like chaos is the problem. But, it is a real thing, and it's something that we have to worry about. But I think we'll die from being infertile before we die from climate change. So this is also a chart which I think is really scary, and I've had different scientists respond to it differently, but it's a chart from NASA which shows the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The chart on your left is the last 400,000 years of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So as you see, yes, it does fluctuate. It goes up and down, but that straight line to the top is since 1950. And the chart to the right is, a kind of expansion of those 50 years. So that you can see, we're on a bad path for a lot of reasons. Where I get challenged by scientists, and I am not a scientist by any means, but the thing that I think of when I look at this is well, what happens if that keeps going up? What are the effects of too much carbon dioxide in the environment? So I looked it up, and it's things like, dizziness, fatigue, depression, high blood pressure. I'm like, yeah, I get that all the time, leading to coma and death. So now a lot of climate scientists I've talked to have said, well, it's going to be, a long time before we poison ourselves from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But at the same time, if we don't stop destroying the soil's ability to absorb that carbon dioxide, what is a long time? 100 years, 200 years? I don't know. It's one more thing to worry about. So, okay, modern organic farming can feed the world. In fact, it's the only thing that can. When I met with those farmers, and I met with them in Iowa and Kentucky and Pennsylvania, they would say, one of the questions was, well, how much land do you have? They said, well, we own, 300, but we lease another 300, and I've got to find another 400, to break even, because I just, I need to keep growing more to make more money. And we'd say, well, why do you need to keep, can you talk more about that? And they said, well, we need to feed the world. That's what we need. And then you ask them, well, where do you get your information from, on farming? They said, well, my chemical dealer. Or, in Iowa, they talk about their co-op, which is basically the chemical dealer. In Pennsylvania, they talk about their crop consultants, which are free, but are their chemical dealers. And so I looked into that whole messaging, and again, one of the advantages I have is I'm not a specialist in any one thing, so I kind of am a dabbler, but I know just enough about economics to be dangerous. But I was and I have the reputation for asking those stupid questions that everybody else wonders, but nobody else asks. But one of the questions I was thinking about was wait a minute, economics 101 with commodities is the more that you grow, the lower the price. And part of why these farmers think they have to grow more is because they'll make more money. But the more they grow, the lower they make. And who's getting rich? The chemical companies. And how are they spending that money? In Washington to get more subsidies, and on advertising and supporting the Farm Bureau, the crop consultants, the chemical dealers, or future farmers of America, our children. Those childhood farming groups including the 4-H, are almost completely sponsored by chemical companies, as well as most of the scientific research in the ag schools in America. So where are they getting all that money from? Well, they're getting it because they're basically taking toxic waste and putting a label on it and selling it at a high price and getting government subsidies to do that. So, okay, the other reason I can say this, that organic can feed the world, is the research at the Rodale Institute. And this is a picture of the farming systems trial, which has been going on for 30 years. Guess which corn is organic. It's the pretty corn on your left. Now, I have to fully disclose that the corn on the right is not GMO corn. We just started doing research on GMO corn, and their yields are higher than organic. But what happens with, is the resistance builds up. And part of the price of those higher yields is exacerbated by needing to apply many more rounds of of Roundup. So instead of just spraying Roundup once, you're spraying it 3, 4, 5 times. And we only just started the research on GMOs about 2 years ago, so we're still analyzing that data. But the difference between the organic corn and the chemical corn, and again, these studies have been going on for 30 years, so this is like what happens over time, is that the organic soil gets better. It actually improves, whereas the chemical soil gets worse, and it just falls apart. It's dead soil. 30 years from now, I'd be surprised if we can grow anything on that. And that's what where desertification, can come from in the future. So, I spoke in Germany about a month ago, and I was fortunate to be on a panel with a man from Kenya, and his whole complaint, because we Americans think, but what about Africa? What about the starving children in Africa? And he was an African man, and his whole message was, look, chemicals don't work for us. They don't work. We don't need chemicals. We need help with distribution, with building like markets and roads. And in fact, the farmers who have used chemicals or GMOs have really suffered and struggled. So they don't want our big American help when it comes to quote unquote better seeds that cost more and lead to more chemical addiction. They want a different kind of help. And part of, I think, what we all need to learn as human beings is how to listen to each other and how to pay attention to the world around us and nature. And what is nature trying to tell us? What are those invasive weeds trying to tell us? What are the goats trying to tell us? We can learn from nature because, I think nature is a lot smarter than we are. And we're part of nature, so we must be pretty smart at some point, too. To me, that's like the essence of what organic is about, is really being respectful and listening and seeking to understand rather than dominate. So modern organic farming, I believe, is the key to saving our world. This is an aerial view of the farm. If you would have seen a picture of the farm from about 35, 40 years ago when my parents first bought it, it all would have been brown. It had been in the same family for 7 generations, and they basically over-farmed it, which does go back to the beginning where there's modern organic farming. I mean, there's old-fashioned organic farming that was destructive. If you don't replenish the soil, if you don't heal the soil and regenerate it naturally or organically, it will not produce over time. So that's what, to me, modern organic farming is about and where we need to head in the future. But we have some formidable foes. This is my favorite picture of all. This is from, I found this on Amazon.com. It's a 1950s brochure from DuPont. And this is selling chemicals in this guy's like proud of what he's doing. And, the language in this brochure is like, man against the soil and, the war against bugs and, so like patriotically destructive. And this is a farmer in Pennsylvania, and he's proudly standing atop all the chemicals he uses in 1 year from DuPont. But they are, and it's not just Monsanto. It is DuPont. It's Dow. It's Syngenta. One of the most shocking stories to me that I came across was about atrazine, which is a hugely pervasive chemical in our environment, and contaminates all sorts of wells. And studies have shown it's horrible for your health. I mean, it leads to infertility in mutated frogs, and gender confusion. I love that, gender confusion. But atrazine is made by a company called Syngenta. And Syngenta is based in Switzerland. And atrazine is banned in Switzerland. So we're the guinea pigs for the rest of the world. So this is Secretary Vilsack. We still haven't decided whether he's a good guy or a bad guy. There's some good things about him, some bad things about him. Ultimately, he did just approve genetically engineered alfalfa, and there's some and sugar beets, and there's some question about, like, did he get the message from Obama that he had to do it or not? But the point is, he's in. It's tough. It's tough. I've read the Farm Bill. It's like 2,000 pages, and it's like idiotic, the stuff that's in there. It's not just agriculture. It's school lunches. It's wildlife conservation. It's there's one other thing. School lunches, wildlife conservation, farming. I don't know, something else big. I'm having a block, but. That's the conservation thing. Oh, food stamps. SNAP. Now called SNAP. You just, reading it, you see that there are just so many vested interests and so many forces, like, fighting for bits and pieces of this money. I had the honor of actually asking Vilsack while I was researching my book, because the Farm Bill was enacted before he was elected the Secretary of Agriculture. And so I said, how much authority do you have to actually change what's in the Farm Bill? And he's like, that's a sore subject. So apparently not much. But that's why this next Farm Bill is so important. And it's incredibly complicated. But everybody should be thinking about what's in that bill and what shouldn't be in that bill. And we should be getting rid of subsidies for chemical companies, for corn. Any kind of corn subsidy should go away. It's bad. It's bad. And we have till sometime in 2012, which is not that much longer. But here's the other thing, is that consumers are confused. And I've seen major research done by major research corporations on this. What do consumers think is better, organic or natural? They think natural is better and safer than organic, even though we know natural means nothing. But it feels good to them. And so that's why, that research came out a year ago, and I can guarantee you, if you go into a supermarket today, you'll see natural all over the place. And it'll be like, where did that come from? Well, it came from consumer research. So businesses are constantly surveying customers and researching customers and saying, what do they prefer? It's not what's real, what's important that matters. It's what people believe that matters. Same thing with Starbucks. We work with Starbucks, and they had the exact same research results. And so now they're putting, they'll be putting natural on everything. So it's up to us, as informed people, to end the confusion, because so many people, as Jay knows, have spent so long creating organic standards, and it was not easy. It wasn't easy. So anytime I hear somebody say, well, we need a new label, we need, a label that's like better or different, it's like, no, we need to make the label the best it can be. It's kind of like it's a living label, and it's the best, most important tool that we have to end this confusion. So that's why, I really feel strongly, much more strongly now than when I started, that we have to stop confusing people and unite and join forces around organic, because it's gonna solve so many problems. It's going to solve a lot of the health problems. It's going to solve a lot of the environmental problems. It's going to solve, a lot of the school lunch problems and the social justice problems and the fair trade problems and the local problems. All these things, it'll solve the animal humane problems. And it's, but it's hard because we like to be different. We're a group of people that like to be different. And I think that's a good thing, but there's also a time to come together and a time to unite, and I think this is the time. So the vegetarians need to lie down with the carnivores. and I say this as a long-time, Rodale person. When I was editor of Organic Gardening magazine about 10 years ago, the letters, it's like, I think once somebody suggested that the woodchuck problem in their garden be solved by, killing the woodchuck and eating it, and it was like years of like angry reader letters. People get very passionate about their beliefs, and these are important beliefs. And I'm not opposed to vegetarianism at all. I think it's great, but it's also like to me, I look at it as like it's a religion. We should have religious freedom. So if you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or a Hindu, that's great, but let's make sure the basics of humanity are treated with respect. And I think that's the same thing within, the environmental organic industry. Is like, it's great to be different, but what's the thing that can unite us and make the world safe for everyone? And then we can express our differences in a safe way. The Beyond Organic people need to embrace the USDA regulation. I met a lot of farmers who, call themselves organic, but they really can't call themselves organic because they're not certified, so they call themselves Beyond Organic, but they're not certified, and as a result, they're not counted. And yes, it's work, and it's a pain in the butt, and it costs money. But those measurements, those people joining up with this label are what makes our voice heard in Washington. So when people ask me too, what should they look for in the store? I always say, look for that label. And I've actually made a really fun game out of it with my 4-year-old, because anybody who's gone food shopping with a 4-year-old knows it can be like kind of hard. They're like, can I get this and that, and anything with a cartoon character, or it's bright and colorful they want, and it's like I finally just said, look, you can get anything you want as long as it's got that little green label on it. And she makes a game out of it now, and it's transformed my food shopping experience. So I highly recommend it. The local growers need to meet up with the fair traders. I believe in fair trade completely, as well as the local food movement. But like I said earlier, it's like everything's local to somebody somewhere, and the more we can support the best practices everywhere in the world, the better off the whole world will be. It's the best thing that we can do. And the best way we can help people in other countries is by, trading fairly with them and making sure that the food that we buy, that they're getting paid a decent wage for, and that they're not being poisoned by, our desperate need for cheap food. this might be controversial, but I don't care. I think we need to stop using the word sustainable and start standing behind the word organic. And the reason that is because if you went to Monsanto.com right now, sustainable would be on their homepage. If you go to Syngenta.com right now, sustainable is on their homepage. They've put together consortiums to try to own this word. We already own organic. And organic represents, what we need it to be for a healthy world, a sustainable world, a world that's just and that's free of toxins and poisons. So I think, people like to use the word sustainable because it's a little less controversial. But actually, my father was one of the people who kind of was in on this whole sustainable thing, and he always regretted it. But it was the only way to get the original research money from the government in the Farm Bill was to not use the word organic because then the chemical companies wouldn't support it. So sustainable was the compromise word. But we don't have to compromise anymore. We don't have to. There's enough science behind organic. There's enough research. There's enough experience of farmers. I just saw numbers just this past week. Farmers are more profitable when they're organic. I've had farmers come up to me and say, you know what, the best thing about going organic was I got my life back again. I am now free and independent from the chemical companies. And, it's emotional. It's very emotional for them. And so there's no reason that we should be apologetic about the word organic. And the more we use it, the more people will become familiar with it and feel comfortable with it and realize that it doesn't necessarily mean, fat-free, sugar-free, salt-free, vegetarian tofu, which is, what some people think. And, there's a reason for that. The organic movement and the health movement kind of came from the same roots. And so it's a complicated story, but an interesting one. We need to stop using the word conventional and start using the word chemical. Now, actually, I think I would add we need to use the word toxic chemical, because I've had scientists say, well, everything is technically a chemical, but not everything is a toxic chemical. So any chance you get to use the word toxic chemical food instead of conventional food is a good opportunity. It's a small thing you can do, but it's great. And now when I hear people say it and they don't even know who I am, it just makes me really happy. So thank you, in advance for your cooperation. So, okay. It's easy when you hear all this information, a lot of the information today that we heard, except for a lot of the hopeful stuff with the goats and everything. It's easy to get depressed and think, we're doomed, the world's going to end, we're all going to die, we're all going to have cancer and sores all over our body. But what heartens me is one of my hobbies is just reading about history. And when you read about the history of women's history and the history of civil rights, what you see is that, what you learn in school is, oh yeah, Martin Luther King and Susan B. Anthony. Well, they were just they were very important people, but they were part of this very long, very hard, very painful process that happened over hundreds of years. So, and it never happened easily. Never. One of the best books to read on both of these topics is there's two books written by Gail Collins. One is America's Women, and the other is kind of picks up in the 60s where that stops, which is When Everything Changed. And, what you see is that, there were women who, long after Susan B. Anthony was like traveling around the country writing, there were women who chained themselves to the White House fence and got put into prison and force-fed for months. And, just because the right to vote for women happened didn't mean that everybody liked it. It was a struggle. It was a fight. And anybody who's a woman in this room today or an African American knows that it's still a struggle. Just because the law changes doesn't mean people's thinking changes. So what heartens me is that we've already been at this for about 100 years. I mean, if you look back, Rudolf Steiner in the early 20s in Germany came up with the idea for biodynamic and organic. And then in England in the 30s and 40s, it got expanded. And then, here in America, with my grandfather, but then, Whole Foods. I mean, if my grandfather couldn't have dreamed of Whole Foods, it would have been beyond his wildest fantasy. So when you look at it that way, it's like, hey, we've come pretty far. Good job. I mean, it's still less than 1% of the acreage in the United States is organic, and less than 3% of the food that's sold in the United States is organic. But it's the fastest growing segment of the food industry, and it's been the fastest growing for the last 20 years. And the demand for organic food in America actually exceeds our capacity right now, which is why you hear the stories about Whole Foods bringing in organic food from China. It's not because they want to get food from China, it's because they can't get enough here. So we need more organic farmers. And the way to get that is to go out and talk to people. Each one of you here has a huge potential to have an impact, both in your buying habits, what you buy, and how you speak and what you say. Any help you can provide will benefit everyone, especially our children. Because ultimately, we're all one tribe. Yes, there's the vegetarians and the carnivores and the locavores and the tea partiers and the coffee parties and the, liberals and the Republicans. But ultimately, we've got to figure out how to get along, because this is our home. And I don't know about you, but I'd like to stay on it for at least my lifetime. And I think we all have the potential to make that possible for a long time if we make the right choices. So thank you very much. And there's going to be birthday cake.
Maria, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a few questions.
But don't leave without. There's a birthday cake for Beyond Pesticides. So
please don't leave yet.
Please don't leave.
Hello, my
Hi.
name is Chelsea Gifford, and I had a couple of questions. One being, at your institute, have you experienced any pesticide drift from the corn that you do spray onto the organic corn?
We do follow pesticides drift or GMO drift.
You said you don't use GMO.
No, we have started GMOs.
Okay.
So with pesticides, we're very careful. First of all, we follow the USDA regulations about distance and things like that. And then we're very careful with timing. And especially with the GMO drift, it's a lot of timing management. So actually that corn that you saw that was the nice corn was actually planted almost a month after the other corn. We followed the local crop consultant who was trying to sell fungicides because when you plant corn early, usually it's wet, and then you need the fungicide to keep the fungus from growing. So we're very careful about following very safe practices.
And then another question I had was, so a lot of these organic farmers are obviously having to sell out and go to subsidized food from the government. And would you say the best way to go about this organic movement would be to somehow get the government to start subsidizing organic farmers?
Well,
in a way?
I think if they could stop subsidizing toxic chemical farmers, that would help everybody, including, our budgets, which we're having problems with. So I think the reason why organic farmers do struggle, it's because of, people not wanting to spend the higher price, but it's the real price of food. Cheap food that you get is very heavily subsidized by the government, and those farmers are not making a decent living without those subsidies. And yet, when the researcher asked those farmers if they would, toxic chemical farmers, if they would want to see subsidies stay or go, they all want them to go. They all want them to go. So it's not the farmers.
They're all addicted.
I am Roundup Ready ignorant. You said something about spraying 5 times with the Roundup for the GMO. Can you grow the crop without spraying at all?
Well, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't explain the basics of genetically modified crops. The sole reason they are genetically modified is to resist the spraying of Roundup, which is a weed killer. So in the olden days, before GMOs, a farmer would spray the field before the plants came up, and then to control weeds after that would till the soil or do other means. But what GMO crops do is now enable farmers to spray the Roundup so the plants, the good plants, the corn, the crops don't die. So instead of just spraying once or twice, they're spraying 3 to 5, to 6 times to kill the weeds. It's not necessary. It's not necessary. And, Theo Coburn is much more, has much more expertise in saying why chemicals like Roundup are not good for us, but they're not good for us. They're not good for us.
Is this on? Okay. This might be more of a comment than a question, but I found it interesting that you were Go USDA Organic. I haven't really heard that as much. I know that particularly for animal regulations, USDA is not good enough. And I know that also for many small farmers, it's far too expensive and too restrictive to become a part of. And so if that is something that we want to rally behind in order to get attention for, and maybe there already is, we need funding to get those small farmers to be a part of that.
Right.
But I think in general, the word organic has become a dirty word, and it's just sort of, in the same way that natural doesn't mean anything, organic can be thrown around in so many contexts. And so I would respectfully disagree with the sustainable word, and I think that we need to reappropriate it and take it back, because I think it's such a powerful word that, is only recently, and I'm being opposed, but I think in maybe the younger generations, that's really the word that strikes us most and is more powerful for us, because we've grown up with organic, and it doesn't mean the same thing.
Right.
That I think for those of you that saw it evolve, sustainable resonates much more with us.
So what does it mean to you?
Organic?
Mm-hmm.
It means Whole Foods. It means USDA. It doesn't mean, and I found it interesting sort of choosing local over organic. I would go local, because I do trust that local, by and large, is going to be practicing organic, maybe not certified,
Yeah.
but the practices that we want to see.
Well, you are exactly why I wrote Organic Manifesto. So I would respectfully ask you to read it. And then also read about women's history, because it's the same thing happening in women's history, where when you don't understand the history, you take your freedom for granted. And you think it's just the way it's always been. And it hasn't. And that's the USDA standards are not perfect. But we have to make them better. And it's the best thing we got going. So, it's harder. It's harder, but it's important. So, thank you. And I grew up before Whole Foods. You do not want to go back to that. That's for sure. They're not perfect either, but it's such a luxury compared to when I was. You couldn't get anything when I was your age. I don't know how old you are, but I know I didn't get anything when I was your age.
I want to just continue touching on this subject. I do think organic is absolutely important. I also agree that small farms can often be organic without affording the label. So I do think we need a tier, especially for an informed public, of what we look for, and absolutely local and organic should be first. I don't think that we should feel comfortable just solely looking for organic, but local and organic. And then if you can't find local, then organic, but definitely don't just settle for organic and go to the grocery stores. I know in Colorado alone, we have 111 CSAs. I can only think of one that's not organic. That's just of the ones that I know of. I think most are organic anyway. So just, educate yourself, make sure you are looking for the best options, which are local and organic.
You said that the 4-H, Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, they're all infiltrated. Mm-hmm. But the Grange is not. And it's a dying organization, except in California, mm-hmm. where we are infiltrating the Grange. Mm-hmm. Transition towns, pesticide activists, mm-hmm. we're all in there joining the Grange, mm-hmm. making it very much the bottom-up mm-hmm. kind of organization that used to be the community-based organization for farmers. And I would suggest that everyone here join a Grange, infiltrate it, and make that the movement of the future.
Excellent. Thank you.
May I just supplement something you've said? History, I really urge you to read the Organic Foods Production Act. You won't believe you're reading a piece of U.S. law. Have you read it, by the way? No. In terms of your expectations of probably how you would define sustainable, it's there in terms of concern not only about what you eat, but how the inputs that are used in agriculture are produced, where they come from, impacts they have on human health and the environment, biodiversity. You can't find a better environmental law anywhere in the world, I don't think. It circumvents the whole issue, all the issues around risk assessment and so forth. Can government subvert that? Certainly can. We saw that. Remember when USDA put out the original rule, they said that genetically engineered food, irradiation, sewage sludge could be considered organic. And what happened? Do you all remember what happened? I guess George spoke about that yesterday. 275,000 people stood up and said to USDA, you can't take away our law and our right to sustainable food. I believe it is your definition of sustainable. I would guess it is. I don't know. And then the issue then is, as we go forward, can the law be subverted by USDA? Yes. Can it be subverted by large companies, General Mills? Yes. Dean Foods? Yes. However, there's another very interesting part of the law. I would say it's one of the most democratically based statutes that we have in the United States. It's akin, I mean, we can debate whether voting, the right to vote in this country is a useful exercise. I debate that with my kids all the time. But it really is an opportunity to control what our foods, what organic is, and I would say at the same time what sustainable is. Because we're about to go into 4 days of meetings in Seattle, 4 days of meetings on the allowable regulatory standards for organic, what should be allowed, what shouldn't be. 2 of those days are public comment. And the board is composed of 15 people, stakeholders, environmentalists, farmers, handlers, and processors. So some of the big boys are on there, but you've got people like me, people from Rodale, a range of people, a Hawaiian coffee grower, a sustainable coffee grower, organic coffee grower. There are all kinds of people there. And what I guess my last pitch here is that please try to use that system, because you can't control whether the local grower you're talking to, that you may or may not know, is telling you the truth. But you can create a system in this country that's accountable to consumers. Obviously, a lot of us in this room have relationships with local growers, and we've been on their farms, we know them, we trust them, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. I'm in that situation. I know a lot of people in the room are. But a lot of us aren't. Other people aren't. And so we need a system that we can ensure has oversight and accountability. And I really urge you to read that statute and give me a ring and tell me where there are problems. And let's work on getting that to be the standard you want it to be and that you can believe in. The government is us.
Yeah,
it's got to be us. And this is a perfect opportunity to make it us. So that's my pitch. Sorry to take so much time.
No, that's great. Thank you.
In your research, you had that one slide showing the organic crops and the toxic chemical crops. What type of fertilizer are you using in both crops?
Well, on the toxic chemical crops, we are relying on the local, extension agent to tell us what the best practice is for local chemical farmers. So it's
fertilizer on your fertilizer side.
Chemical fertilizers, the latest advances in chemical fertilizers, herbicides, fungicides. I can't tell you exactly which ones, but they're whatever the other farmers in our community are using based on the Farm Bureau and the extension agents. On the organic side, it's animal manures, and so we have plots that have animal manure and plots that have green manures, which are just, but it's also a rotational process. So, there's legumes that fix nitrogen from the air that get tilled back into the soil, and then compost.
And these crops are for human consumption or livestock consumption?
We currently are, they're commodity crops. So they go into and we can't sell the organic crops because of the research as organic, so we sell them as commodity. But it's corn, soy, and it's a corn-soy rotation. We're currently, this year, adding in pasture-raised dairy into the whole system, and adding a whole element of dairy to the process.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about biosolids. Have you ever done research on your organic, your toxic chemical crops, and then another research on your fertilizer just using the biosolids?
If we have, I'm not educated enough to speak on it. So, but I would encourage you to go to rodeleinstitute.org and talk to ask the scientists there. We just hired Elaine Ingram, who's one of the top soil scientists in the world, who is now the head researcher at the Rodale Institute. So she'd be able to answer your question.
Yeah, because there's a lot of talk about biosolids, not to use biosolids because...
She would know the answers that you're looking for.
And do you do research on the... have you ever seen the manure to a lab to do lab tests and see on the
I think we have, yeah, but I don't know the answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm a student at CU Boulder, and me and a group of fellow students started an 80-acre organic farm a few years ago. But the problem was we can't afford to become organically certified. And so for a while we used the word sustainable in Boulder. And so I think the first thing, if we're going to get more organic available, we need to somehow find a way to make it more available to smaller farms. Well, my question to you is, so in this transition process where we're moving from the heavily subsidized GMO crops to more permaculture and organic methods, food prices for the organic and toxic-free foods are going to be higher. So how do we make that kind of healthier food and safer food available to low-income communities and traditionally disadvantaged communities who don't have the access?
That's a great question, and I think there's the two-pronged approach. The first and harder prong approach is to attack the Farm Bill subsidies, because that's what's creating the price inequity and the cheaper food. And in fact, if you've been following the news, food prices are going up everywhere around the world, and part of the reason is food is being diverted to biofuels. So it's like our hunger for cheap fuel is now causing food prices to rise for everyone all around the world, because a lot, biofuel also, the soy and corn used for biofuel also are animal feed, which is not the right thing to begin with. So that's one prong approach, which is the harder approach. But the other, there's tons of groups all around the country now creating urban community gardens and rooftop gardening, guerrilla gardening, and I'm involved with a couple of groups in New York City and also locally. My husband's, doing it in our local area, and it's really, anybody can do that. You just get involved with your community, and it's growing like gangbusters everywhere, and that's important for all those people who can't really afford food. Most people in New York City, for example, in like Harlem and there's no supermarkets. There's no, if only they had Whole Foods. They don't have even like a corner grocery. But there's a growing initiative with the city and the New York Restoration Project, which I'm involved in, to create community gardens, and it's happening. So it's something that every single person in this room can get involved in and make a difference. Mm-hmm.
Oh, excuse me. Some of the talk about history made me think about recent history a bit more. You're talking about local and organic and a bunch of food movements happening at about the same time. And I look back in my own history and I say, I think that one moment captured in literature that really crystallized some of this for many people was Michael Pollan's book, Omnivore's Dilemma. Mm-hmm. And since you have a different perspective, think about that book and that time and some of the bits that came out of there. Connect that up to where we find ourselves today and your book.
Well, that's really a good point. And actually, I know Michael Pollan, and I've read all his books. And so I know I've had conversations with him about this, and I know where he's coming from. And, he is a fantastic, beautiful writer who grew up in Manhattan. I loved how he said in I think it was that book, his father was a great indoorsman, his mother, his mother is Corky Pollan, who was one of those like beautiful gray-haired women with the big black rimmed glasses, who's the style director for Vogue magazine. So he comes from a very refined New York Times universe. And so he's an incredible researcher, an incredible writer. But I think what happened is, and he has said this, he said this to me and to other people, like, he had no idea that that book would have the impact that it had. And looking back, there's things that he kind of wishes he wouldn't have done, and that, people take it on in a way that, maybe wasn't how he intended it. Now, he's a big proponent of organic, but he's also trying to make change. And he's also part of, now he's moved to Berkeley, which is a whole different kind of Manhattan, but very much of a Manhattan, see, I live in Pennsylvania, where people, still don't know what organic means. They don't know what sustainable means. They don't know what natural means. They're just worried about their kids getting sick, and they want to do the right thing. So there's the intellectual process, which is fascinating and interesting, but then there's the reality of most people in the country and around the world who are just trying to make the right decision. So I feel like we have a responsibility to not just be, up in the clouds, but to really be practical. Because this is a practical effort that has to be made, so I applaud everything he's done, and I think he's a wonderful person, and I'm so glad that his books have reached so many people. But I also think we have to be practical and be responsible, and think about things carefully. Thank you. I don't know what the timing is, so.
You mentioned organic standards worldwide and fair trade. Mm-hmm. How in the world could we, especially with China bringing in food, how do you do that? How do you do an organic standard in another country when we can't even have our farmers do it here because they can't afford it?
There are international organic standards, and for food to be brought into the United States, it has to meet the USDA organic standards, whether it's from China or Germany or Africa. So it's actually, again, it's one of the few things you can actually trust, because there's a lot more independent inspection happening in organic than in any other type of food that you'll ever eat. So it's, nothing's perfect. Nothing's perfect. And, not everyone is honest. But the more independent certification, and the more you also know your farmers personally, but, even sometimes those farmers aren't honest. I mean, I know a lot of farmers in my area who, if the weather's bad, they bring out the fungicide, so you have to, be very just cautious. So. Mm-hmm.
Maria, I'd like to add one thing here. I've heard several organic farmers say that they had difficulty in becoming certified. I have been an organic farmer for a very long time, and I'd be more than happy to help you work through those issues. And we can't afford not to be certified. You've got to move forward. If you need help, there's help out there, and we want to help. Yeah. And so don't be discouraged, and don't let somebody, try to hold you back from doing that. Maria, thank you so much. We have an organic cake that we're going to serve here.